The speech I'm refuting today is on the war in Iraq. My opponent, Lexi, stated as her main claim that the U.S. troops in Iraq are unnecessary and need to be sent home. My opponent had two secondary claims. The first claim was that the objectives in the war have been accomplished, and her second claim was that the emotional effects of the war are more costly than the economic ones. Going back to her first claim, she stated that all objectives have been met and used a quote from our president, Barack Obama, that listed a few of the accomplishments we have achieved while being in Iraq. After reading most of the speech that Obama gave on February 27, 2009, it was clear to me that my opponent used a sweeping generalization. While President Obama did state that we have achieved a lot in Iraq, the rest of his speech gives us reason to believe that not all objectives have been met, and that there are several exceptions in the case. Our president also stated at this time, but let there be no doubt, Iraq is not yet secure, and there will be difficult days ahead. Violence will continue to be a part of Iraq. Too many fundamental political questions about Iraq's future remain unresolved. Too many Iraqis are still displaced or destitute. Declining oil revenues will put on an added strain on a government that has had difficulty delivering basic services. And not all of Iraq's neighbors are contributing to its security. Some are working at times to undermine it, and even as Iraq's government is on a sure footing, it is not yet a full partner, politically and economically, in the region or with international community. Obama is saying that although we have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein's regime and established a sovereign government, there are still some objectives that need to be reached. According to the Guardian world news writer Ewan McCaskill, of the 142,000 U.S. troops in Iraq, between 92,000 and 107,000 are ready to leave by August 2010. The mission at that point will change from combat to one that deals primarily with training Iraqi forces, supporting the Iraqi government, and engaging in counterterrorism. This proves that the president believes that there is still work to be done in Iraq before he plans to withdraw the troops. Therefore, not all objectives have been carried out to their fullest, which in turn requires the U.S. to keep troops in Iraq. This doesn't necessarily mean that they are there for combat, but mainly to keep Iraq going in a positive direction. Obama also said that today there is a renewed cause for hope in Iraq, but that hope rests upon an emerging foundation. U.S. troops are a critical element in formulating this ideal future of Iraq. My opponent's second claim is that the emotional effects of the war are more costly than the economic ones. I feel that this claim is irrelevant. I feel it is irrelevant because even though my opponent has a good argument or point here, the secondary claim does not contribute any evidence to support her major claim that the troops are unnecessary in Iraq. While this claim doesn't really support her major claim, there is still some dispute in her second claim. It is no question or surprise the astounding amount of injuries and casualties that have been since the war started. The dispute in this claim comes to play when talking about the severity of the emotional effects of war on the soldiers. The unconscionable acts of violence and collateral damage that followed our missions, and the ever-present paranoia that every Muslim could be a terrorist. This is a quote my opponent used when describing one soldier's emotional distress that war had upon him. This was a large assumption, making it seem as if every soldier has that large of an impact from the emotional effects. According to the Associated Press, there are only about 1 in 8 reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder has treatments such as educating patients, using medications, or using therapy. HelpGuide.org stated that veterans can go to a VA hospital or center for help regarding any post-war issues. Vet centers offer free counseling to combat veterans as well as their families. While this can be a very serious illness, I feel that my opponent made a large assumption by giving only one example and very little supporting evidence. I feel that the economic effects of the war could potentially be more costly to our country as a whole than the emotional effects because, as my opponent stated in her claim, we have already spent over $1 trillion on this war. Martin Wolf, chief economics correspondent for MSNBC.com, stated that one thing is certain about the Iraq war. It has cost a lot more than advertised. In fact, the tab grows by at least $200 million each and every day. This was quoted in 2006, where they could already see the vast impact this war would have on the U.S. financially. I know that emotional effects can have a serious negative impact on the people, but treatment is provided in order to help those who have suffered any traumatic illnesses and want to take advantage of it. but who is going to pay back all the money that the U.S. has lost when this war is over? In conclusion, the U.S. troops in Iraq are necessary and should not be withdrawn yet. They are essential in order to complete the goals we set out to do and to continue to help Iraq to stand on their own 2 feet. The U.S. troops still have objectives that need to be accomplished in Iraq before they are sent home. Also, while the emotional effects of the war are very serious and have a large impact on soldiers and families, economic effects have had more of a negative impact on our country as a whole.
All right, the structural things are all fine. The signposting, as you get to the first point, is pretty clear. You've got an explanation of why the advocate's claim is a sweeping generalization, and then you use Obama's own words to suggest that there are significant exceptions, that a significant amount of work remains to be done. I don't know how you quantify the number of troops that remain there as being significant or insignificant, or whether or not that demonstrates that there exists a continuing need there. I think it would be helpful if you could show, for instance, how the U.S.'s presence is going to facilitate addressing some of those issues of long-term security or infrastructure planning or stability in the government. I think that's where you needed a little bit more information. The transition to the second point was really clear. I thought you had a very legitimate challenge on relevance on the point that you're presenting here, but then engage in your own argument that I'm not quite sure why it's relevant concerning the amount or the expense of the war. That doesn't make much sense to me. It doesn't address why the advocate's claim is illegitimate or doesn't contradict that position. It kind of introduces a side issue. The argument about post-traumatic stress syndrome, though, was a little bit more particular, and you kind of suggest that there's some potential treatment. There's a general challenge to whether or not the one quote that is being used is really something that we ought to be making a big inference from, although you offer better quantification than the advocate does, but you suggest that there are ways that we can treat that and adjust that to minimize it. So, you know, if there was some effectiveness on that, I think that might have been a better way to follow up on that point than getting involved in the cost issue and then just arguing which is bigger, you know, which has the bigger impact, the cost or the social issues. I'm not sure that they're mutually exclusive. All right, thank you.